My name's Mark Parnell and I'm a Greens member of the South Australian Parliament. I sit in the upper house of Parliament. I have another Green colleague there, Tammy Franks, and together we too are the voice of the Greens in South Australia. My connection with the Giant Australian Cuttlefish and the campaign to protect it goes way back, I guess, to my years working as a lawyer, an environmental lawyer, where I did a lot of work for people in Whyalla, in particular around the dust pollution that came from the steelworks. But since being elected to Parliament, certainly the further industrial development of the Point Lowly Peninsula is something I've paid a lot of attention to. I've asked many questions in Parliament and we're going to keep working on it because the stakes are just so high. It seems that we're now looking at an enormous expansion of industrialisation, and these projects have slowly developed over the last several years, and one of the things that means is that you could end up with the death of 1,000 cuts for that part of the marine environment. If it's not one thing that knocks off the cuttlefish, it could be the next thing. So we need to be very careful at looking at the whole and not just the individual parts. When BHP Billiton first announced their plans to expand their Olympic Dam operations, it was clear they were going to need water. Now, one option they had was taking more water out of the Great Artesian Basin. And given that their existing extractions are already causing problems, especially with the ecosystems around the mound springs, those very special areas in the desert where the groundwater reaches the surface, I think the government did the right thing by saying, we're not going to let you take any more of that water. So the company then looks to the River Murray. Now, we've just been through one of the worst and the driest situations in the Murray-Darling Basin, and so I think again the government did the right thing by saying to BHP Billiton, you're not going to take water out of the River Murray for your Olympic Dam mine. So that left the company really with one option. They wanted a desalination plant. Now, companies being what companies are, their job is to minimise their costs and to maximise their return to shareholders, so they chose the cheapest location that was technically viable for them, and that was the Upper Spencer Gulf. Now, anyone who knows anything about the marine environment would know that the upper reaches of a gulf, like Spencer Gulf, have relatively slow circulation of water. The currents might move fast, but the overall circulation of water is very slow. Now, one of the parliamentary committees that I sit on, it's the Environment, Resources and Development Committee, we decided to undertake an inquiry into the desalination plant proposed for Point Lowly. The committee, in relation to Point Lowly, heard from a range of witnesses, including scientists, and we eventually came up with a recommendation that was unanimously supported by all the parties that were represented, and at that stage, Liberal, Labor, Green and an Independent. And the number one recommendation from that inquiry was look for a better location. It doesn't mean that the company will inevitably get its way, because we're still waiting for federal and state governments to sign off on the final project. So the Greens certainly aren't giving up on what we think is a far more sensible proposal, and that is, if you're going to have a desalination plant, don't put it in Upper Spencer Gulf, put it out over on the west coast somewhere where the water is very deep, the ocean currents are very strong. It's a wild, rugged coastline. The proposals at Point Lowly are all being assessed in isolation. In other words, people are forgetting that, all of these things together form part of the whole. And that's what leads to the potential, as I see it, for the death of 1,000 cuts. I mean, let's have a look at what's there and what's being proposed. First of all, you've got the existing Santos facility, which we now know leaks and has leaked into the groundwater, and we know that that leak has reached the foreshore. In terms of proposals, you've got yet another diesel facility proposed. You've also got proposals for an explosives factory, to create the explosives that BHP Billiton need to dig the biggest hole on the face of the planet. It requires a lot of explosives. They want to manufacture those at Point Lowly. The mining boom is going to need a new deep sea port to export the product around the world, and people are pointing to Point Lowly saying, well, that's a good spot for copper exports, for example, or even iron ore exports. So you've got all of those on top of this massive desalination plant and its millions of litres of waste brine per day, all being concentrated on this one small part of the South Australian coastline that, as luck has it, is the one location where the giant Australian cuttlefish aggregate every winter to breed. It's a potential perfect storm.